Welcome, Maria Wheatley. Thank you for joining us. We were going to be meeting at the conference in a couple of weeks' time in Glastonbury. So, unfortunately, we're having to reschedule that to June of next year. But having said that, there's a golden lining to this because you'll be able to come and join us to to do a guided tour of Glastonbury Abbey and the Knights Templar sites within it. So, but you also have an exciting book coming out called The Secret History of Stonehenge and the Ancient Histories and Lost Civilisations. Would you like to tell us about it?
Yes, it's going to be out on Monday. It is very exciting, and I have several book launches around the Wiltshire area throughout 2024, actually, and some of those will be online on Zoom as well, and you can join me there. I explore ancient civilizations in The Secret History of Stonehenge. The many different types of long-skulled people. When I first discovered them in 2015, I thought there was just one type of elongated skull, but there isn't. There's 2 to 3 types as well. And even the much taller, round-skulled people used cranial deformation to make their skulls rounder and larger. But if we go back to the much smaller, fey-like looking people that had the long skulls, these were the ones that laid out the ley system, because we know this because they're Neolithic sites. They're the oldest sites. And what did they look like? They were very strange looking. They not only had longer skulls, their ear placement was in a different location, making them look almost kind of pixie-like, sci-fi-like. Their bodies had a different proportion as well. They were very, very sensitive to earth energies, and they located really powerful places to put their sacred sites upon, and then link them sometimes with topographical lays and sometimes with energy lays as well. So it was the whole system was down to them. They also looked at Stonehenge for not just the famous sun alignments and moon alignments, but also celestial alignments that I noticed, one of which links into a very ancient goddess of reincarnation that is linked to Stonehenge as well. I also show the technology used to make the henge and how we have been lied to about what the actual henge was. Additionally, I talk about the magical healing properties of the healing trilithons, because some of them were exceptionally well made, and another one could actually produce water. And it produced healing water observed by a curator. I have witnesses from the 40s and 50s that saw this water being produced. And the Ministry of Works, which is your kind of old-fashioned English heritage, what did they do when people came from afar for healing? They plugged it up with plastic and concrete. Also, is it just 5 trilithons? There's a missing stone setting that was buried because it didn't fit the model produced by older antiquarians of the 1724 period, William Stukeley. If it didn't fit his model, they buried it. So I have raised the lost standing stones at Stonehenge to give you a new view of an ancient stone circle that we all think we know. I explore other ancient civilizations from Egypt, Malta, and across Europe as well. I look into trepanning. Why did the ancients trepan their skulls, especially in the Neolithic? Are they matched to particular ancient sites? And I think I found the key to trepanning and link it not only just to surgery, but to the sites as well. So it's very, very exciting. And I'm really pleased that it's going to be out this Monday.
Maria, that sounds absolutely outstanding. That's just once you even talk about that, there's all of these questions just pop up in my mind because you have you conjure images of the Egyptian royalty and their domed hats and their images in the petroglyphs, but also the kind of like Mongolian royalty too, which look like some sort of sci-fi creatures with their longer hooded hats, tendrils that they had. Fabulous images that we can see only from historical sort of photographs because they were only lost to us in the last 100 or 200 years with ethnic issues with neighboring countries, that these people they're not so fictional, they're actually very real, sort of, because we don't have to go back to we don't have
Absolutely, Josie, because just recently as well, there was an ancient site in Somerset, a spectacular ancient site, and I investigated some of the skulls there, and they had a depression coming down the front of their nose, if you imagine a depression, or it could have been a large depression here, a ridge along the kind of top of the head, and they had elongated skulls as well. So there's, again, more different types, and there was only 3 of these skulls with the depression that really did look very, very otherworldly. And I've got an amazing illustrator working with me where we're using the reports and how they sounded like through the written documented evidence of them, and we've reconstructed them, and they do look otherworldly.
I wonder what language they spoke. Once we look back at some of these earlier images and earlier depictions, like we have over here in Ireland, we look at images of what the early Irish used to wear, and it seems so remote from where we are at the moment. It's hard to believe that the people of Ireland would live wearing yellow coloured linen dresses that sort of came halfway down, and that was all the warmth that they had in these cold days, so but it seems very far removed from where we're at. So, yeah, what are your thoughts about who these people were and how they lived their lives? It seems that they were ceremonial roles were a lot more important in those days.
Different eras did different things. So the Neolithic 5,500 years ago practiced different things than in 2500 BC. They're 2 separate different civilizations. So if we go to the former civilization, they built some fantastic ancient sites in the Neolithic, the long-skulled people, cursus monuments. Now, if you imagine, prior to 1724, there was standing just in front of Stonehenge a monument with chalk walls that went up to 6 to 10 feet high, and it was nearly 2 miles long. That stood in front of Stonehenge. That was an elongated skulled type of monument. What was that used for? The largest cursus monument, as I've pointed out many times, was 7 miles long in Dorset. So they were really sophisticated in their build, their structures as well. Now, when we come to Stonehenge, for example, as I point out in The Secret History of Stonehenge, when the much, much taller Beaker people, as they're often called by archaeologists, came to Stonehenge, they started to change that monument to make it theirs. They took stone settings out. So I give the original long-skulled version of Stonehenge and then compare it to the round-skulled people and what they did to Stonehenge. They changed the way that you entered it, and they used a lot of very powerful opiates in their ceremonies, and they used to have them like censers that they were incense pots. They used to swing like this, and I've reconstructed the ancient priesthood. But more than that, what I realized about Stonehenge, Avebury, and going north to Yorkshire, Derbyshire, that there was a certain way that the shamans of Stonehenge were buried, and they had certain crystal kits on them. Archaeologists noticed time and time again they carried certain items with them. I reveal for the first time how they were buried, where they were buried, and I've discovered the shaman and women of Stonehenge.
That sounds amazing. That sounds absolutely exciting, Maria. I mean, what kind of crystals did they carry? I'm delighted to hear about the shaman and the shame women of Stonehenge. And I mean, it sounds like these guys had a different mindset, a different way of thinking, a different way of modeling, and very mathematical. Even describing them there makes me think that they were a lot more interactive in terms of the astrology as well. I mean, I wonder, if spiritually connecting with these people, would that reveal much? And what do we know anything about their diet? I mean, what What made
We
these
know a lot.
people?
Yeah, you've got a whole branch of archaeochemistry that looks into things like what they were eating. Obviously, they had a good organic diet with good water, so and they were getting really fresh, deep water from beneath the ground in terms of like water divining, and they were eating quite healthy. The elite of the ancient megalithic world, not just Stonehenge. I look into the megalithic world in this book. They were sourcing different types of foods, and the elite would really like to eat sweetened pork. So they fed their pigs on honey in around 2500 BC and had very, very sweet meats with a lot of different milks. They loved, sheep's milk, cow's milk as well, and a lot of vegetables and nettles. Nettles was quite high up, as was burdock. They ate that as well. It's a really high source of carbs. So they were very, very healthy, and their bone density was really healthy. And one thing that the antiquarians and archaeologists alike noticed was there was no dental damage because there was no sugar, not much sugar in their diet either. So they were very, very healthy people. And it's a misnomer when we think that everybody was dying around 30, like the archaeologists would have you believe. There was some very, very old people in the landscape. And they were looking to the placements of the sun and the moon and the particular constellations for getting the kind of energy, the celestial energy, as much as the solar and lunar energy, especially at the esoteric center of Stonehenge. It's quite amazing. These were sophisticated people that tapped into the celestial and they tapped in the terrestrial, and they were the in-between of that.
And were they buried with metals or with any kind of sigils?
It depends what era. Now, if you go to the Neolithic era of the long-skulled people, the two types of long-skulled people, then no, there's no metal found. It's the new Stonehenge Neolithic. But they did have certain artifacts like pottery they would be buried with, and flint knives, some beautiful flint knives actually, in kind of like circular shapes. And they liked particular crystals like quartz crystals. But when we come to the Bronze Age and the Chalcolithic Age, the Copper Age, it precedes the Bronze Age by about 500 years. Well, then you have a lot of copper material, which they extracted from rocks like malachite. And then when it comes to the Bronze Age, after the Chalcolithic period, then you have bronze, silver, and a lot of gold is now being made into artifacts like hair trestles for the high priestesses and the high priest, and beautiful like crescent moon necklaces the high priestesses of Stonehenge and Avebury and elsewhere were wearing.
Wow, I've been sort of seeing a lot of images more recently of the rebuilding of Stonehenge by historic England or the predecessors of them at that time. How much of a difference did they make to the stone circle?
Well, it really started at the turn of the last century with Colonel Hawley. If you look at all the antiquarian pictures of Stonehenge, you've got the greater trilithon at a massive lean. Colt Hoare drew it out in sort of like 19th century, and Colonel Hawley put that straight. Then in the 50s and 60s, you had Professor Stuart Piggott and Professor Richard Atkinson. They restored some of the stones as well because it was quite recumbent. Stones had fallen over, and they reset them. They put a whole trilithon back up. Trilithon 57 and 58 fell in a storm because it had been basically dug into, and it fell and crashed. And that crash of that trilithon could be heard half a mile to a mile away in Amesbury. So they restored it over a period of time. But going back to places like Avebury, for instance, that got restored by Alexander Keeler, who was an archaeologist, and he bought the land, that has more reconstruction than what Stonehenge has.
There's another question I had there with regards to the long-skulled people, because I think these are fascinating people. Uh, there's been a lot of queries about who the fairy are in Ireland, and you'd mentioned there that you thought that there was fairy type people that that had long skulls. Now, reading different sources and the source of the fairy, it look it drastically varies. I mean, we have some authors saying that the fairy were descended from the heavens with Lucifer into the, which it makes me feel ill at the thought of that. It sits so wrong with me, but it's an interesting paradigm. And but then there are other people that actually say that the fairy were the pharaohs, and that the pharaohs had returned to Ireland from Egypt after they had left here in the Diluvian times. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are in the actual evidence that we have, and the evidence says that these long-skulled people had ears off placement. The women were about 4'9", and the men were no taller than 5'4". All the femur bones, even from long barrows called the Giant's Grave, their femur bones show that they were very short. The reason why I link them to the Fae is through the mythology was where the rulers there, the Tuatha De Danann, that's probably pronounced wrong to an Irish woman, so forgive me. They descended into the mounds at one point after losing a battle. Now, when we look to the history of the area, that's what happened to these people. They were placed into all of the long barrows. They descended into the mounds after they had a battle with the much, much taller beaker culture. And that's what happened. So I see the genesis of the mythology of the Fae being represented by the long-skulled people. The DNA on some of them has been done. So they are a different form of human. But there are some anomaly skulls, like the ones I was telling you about with the depression, the ridges, and the eyes would be being described very strangely as they had no forehead and the eyes appeared on top of the head. That's been 3 descriptions of that type of long skull. So for me, I'm not saying that they descended from the skies, or in Hopi tradition, for example, they emerged from the earth. They had emergence points. Who's to say that didn't occur? I look at kind of the wider holistic whole and say, this is the evidence. That's what I'm presenting. And I think it's the genesis of the mythology of the Fae.
I agree. I think it's actually a topic that I need to be looking into a bit further. I mean, sort of looking at even, other groups of peoples like the Vril and so forth. And because, it's only, I think we've lost a lot of sort of the complexities of different peoples in this world. I mean, even the likes of our little people, sort of as we were discussing in our last conversation about the little people, the leprechauns and so forth in South America, and our giants. We have giants here in Ireland that we've uncovered, sort of just that were in Leixlip and Antrim, several places, and also, but those are only 9 or 10 or 12 or 16 feet in height. Whereas we can see that there were trees and so forth that were massive by today's scale, and giants in the landscape. And it just looks so plausible that we had very huge giants at one time in the very distant past. So, I mean, I think we're having to look at the whole of history all over again. I think we've been sort of sold a
Yes.
certain version of history that maybe isn't to our benefit, So, and
Absolutely. I mean, sorry to butt in. So, sorry, you were saying, Josie?
please do. I'm interested by all of this because I think we've been sold a sort of a watered down version of history, which kind of diminish our, I suppose, our connection with the land and our connection with what's possible. And I think that's the most important thing is that we've been sort of saying, oh, we're as complex and as fully actualized as we ever can be. And I think that's nonsense. I think that we've got a long way to go. But it's a few names in the powers that be that basically decry sort of what we can and what we cannot do. And once we connect fully to our history of what's gone before and the likes of, the building of the pyramids, the likes of building of these fantastic structures, then we realize we're actually, I mean, looking at the stone stargates from around the world and all of these different peoples, and we realize we're actually getting a very diminished, watered down version of what we possibly could be.
Yes, I mean, this is where I think, the ancients were incorporating far more than just earth currents, aquifers that produce spiral patterns like the geospiral pattern. They were also looking to grids, small grids. I mean, I cover a whole chapter in the book about magic squares and how magic squares can manifest in the earth, and the ancients were looking for those. They were looking for these smaller grids. If you imagine you've got giant grids going encompassing the whole of the earth, like a giant fishnet thrown over Gaia, they're global grid systems. And they're some of them are quite toxic, like the curry net, for example, producing geopathic stress locations. But there's much, much smaller grids called the Saturn square, 3x3 magic, for example. And the ancients were looking to those. They are the key point to unlocking the knowledge of a sacred site. That's what they encoded that into place, the power of place. And by looking for these particular areas within a site, it's like unlocking the magic of it. Also, what I noticed as well, when we look at these magic squares, Stonehenge has the square of the sun. The square of the sun is a magic square. So no matter if you added up all the numbers that way, that way, that way, that way, it comes to 111. If you add up all of the numbers in the magic square, it's 666. And so it's a very powerful square. When we look to modern buildings such as the Masonic headquarters in Washington, for example, that has a 6x6 magic square of the sun in a window where at the zenith of the sun at midday, it shines through that magic square. And that's a high energy point within particular buildings. And the Templars, to a certain degree, also use that ancient technology of the magic squares. All of the wonders of the ancient world were placed on magic squares as well. For example, when we look to the pyramids of Egypt, of Giza fame, that's the square of Mercury. When we look to the hanging gardens of Babylon, that was the magic square of Mars. That's a Templar square. The Templars were very much into Mars. It can generate fortune, it can generate strength and power. So each one of these squares is associated with particular attributes, similar in some regard to astrology. And that's where you can really work the energies of place. The earth energies are the most powerful if they're like 3x3 magic. So the Saturn square was also used by the ancient Chinese feng shui masters in the art of placement. Numerology is born of the 1 to 9 numbers of the magic square as well. So I really look in depth of this, and I got taught about the magic squares in terms of earth energy patterns by my late father, who in turn got taught by a master dowser. And I haven't really explored this so much as my other earth energies, because they're kind of really, really powerful. They're gateways. They're like a portal. They're a gateway to linking you to the planetary consciousness of that planet, because each one of these magic squares has a seal. That's how you block it. And then it has an opening and a closing gate as well. So they are active numerical portals born of the earth.
This sounds like an amazing book. I really can't wait to get my hands on it, Maria. So you're discussing the magical squares in your Secret History of Stonehenge book. Is that correct?
That's okay. Right. It's got a whole chapter, a couple of chapters, I think, about that, about the history of it, where it came from, how you get an opening gate and a closing gate as well, the the number system of it. And I explore that in detail, and the most commonest type that you find at sacred sites as well.
Would you like to talk us through your courses? You have some extraordinarily fantastic courses that you do with regards to learning about dowsing to a high level. Now, I think that these sound like money well spent, to be quite honest, you know. So would you like to talk us through the different courses that you run?
Thank you. Yes, well, this year, well, once a year, I always have my professional dowsing weekend course at Avebury, and that's on the Avebury Experience.co.uk. I'm also having some practical Templar courses at doing with the magic squares and earth energies at Glastonbury this year. And I'm also going to ancient America, to Chaco Canyon and Aztec ruins, because I discovered an earth energy system there, similar to what Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst discovered in the Avebury environs. That's where you have a ley line with two earth currents entwining it. Hamish called his Mary and Michael, and I've called mine Wolf and Deer in the United States. So I'll be teaching there as well. And go to my website, the aveburyexperience.co.uk, and have a look at my other practical courses is there. I'll be doing some really interesting work with the magic squares and with earth energies and transformative healing earth energies at Avebury. And then when it comes to the end of the year, we're approaching a really big, powerful lunar alignment, the night of the high moon, which only happens every 18.61 years. And I've located all of the stones at Avebury and elsewhere besides that are going to become active. And a lot of people will be selling these courses to do with the moon's botonic cycle, the night of the high moon for 2024, but it doesn't come into its power, not really, until 2025, where I will be then going to some ancient sites to explore the night of the high moon. It's the night of the divine feminine power in the land and in the skies, where the two meet and create, again, one of these wonderful magical squares that we will be working with. So yes, I've got lots of practical courses coming up on my website, and I also teach on Zoom. I'll be doing an Egyptian pendulum dowsing course in January. That's very popular. And I'll be going to Egypt in April with Kerry Cassidy, and you can find details on that on Project Camelot. Just put that into Google, and Kerry and I explore in depth the different ancient sites, from different civilizations to celestial and extraterrestrial civilizations, which Kerry Cassidy covers as well.
They sound fantastic. Actually, every single one of those sounds like a really good event, you know, so that sounds really good. Thank you very much for joining us, Maria. I really appreciate it. I could actually sit down and listen to you for hours and days and weeks, you know, because there's so much information. I just so enjoy it. So, but look, thank you very much.